The city exhaled a breath of cold, gray mist, a sigh that clung to the bare knuckles of tree branches and beaded on the iron fences of the park. It was the kind of day that made you feel small, a forgotten detail in a vast, indifferent painting. For 10-year-old David, small was a feeling he knew well. He sat on a park bench, the wood cold and damp even through his thin coat, clutching a brown paper bag. Inside was the sum total of his day's treasure, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the bread slightly squashed, the jelly already beginning to bleed a faint purple stain through the paper. It wasn't much, but in the sterile, scheduled world of the group home, it was his. His to eat slowly, his to savor, a small, sweet rebellion against the constant sharing, the constant noise, the constant feeling of being one of many. He unwrapped it carefully, the familiar scent of roasted peanuts and sweet grape, a small comfort against the chill. He was about to take the first, most anticipated bite when a movement at the edge of his vision made him pause. A man was huddled at the far end of the bench, a figure so still and folded into himself, he seemed almost part of the winter landscape. He wore a threadbare coat that might have been expensive once, but was now a testament to long, hard days and even longer, harder nights. His face was a road map of sorrow, etched with lines of weariness that went deeper than just a lack of sleep. His eyes, fixed on some distant and seen point, were hollowed out things, vacant of hope. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even looking for anything. He was simply enduring, existing in a quiet pocket of despair that felt colder than the wind. David watched him for a long moment. He saw the man's hands, tucked into his sleeves, trembling slightly. He saw the faint, almost imperceptible shiver that racked his thin frame. David knew hunger. He knew the gnawing emptiness in the pit of his stomach that made the world feel sharp and hostile. He looked down at his sandwich, the perfect, soft square of bread. Then he looked back at the man. The first bite could wait. He stood up, his small sneakers silent on the damp pavement, and walked the few steps to the man. He held out the sandwich. The man didn't seem to notice him at first, lost in his private grief. David nudged the paper bag gently against the man's arm. "Here," he said, his voice small but clear. The man flinched, his eyes slowly focusing on the boy, then on the offering. There was a flicker of confusion, then a deep, profound weariness. "I don't have any money, son," the man rasped, his voice rough with disuse. David shook his head. "It's not for money," he said simply. "You look like you need it more than me." The man stared at the boy, truly seeing him for the first time. He saw a child with wide, earnest eyes, a face that hadn't yet been hardened by the world's disappointments. He saw an impossible act of generosity. He looked at the sandwich, then back at the boy. "But it's your lunch," he said, a statement of fact, not a question. David just shrugged, a small, simple gesture. "I can wait till dinner." A strange, complex emotion passed over the man's face. It was as if a thick layer of ice, long frozen over his heart, had just sustained a tiny crack. He reached out a trembling hand and took the sandwich. His fingers brushed against David's, and they were as cold as stone. He looked at the boy, and for the first time, a sliver of light entered his vacant eyes. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. "What's your name?" David tucked his hands into his pockets. "Just David," he replied. The man nodded slowly, unwrapping the sandwich as if it were a precious artifact. He took a bite, and his eyes closed for a moment. It was more than just food. It was a connection, a moment of grace in an ocean of despair. He ate in silence, and David stood there, not wanting to intrude, but not wanting to leave either. When the man was finished, he carefully folded the paper bag. He reached into the deep pocket of his worn coat and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was an old-fashioned compass, its silver casing tarnished and worn smooth with time. The glass was scratched, but the needle still quivered, faithfully pointing north. He held it out to David. "I want you to have this," he said, "so you never lose your way." David hesitated. "I can't take that." The man's gaze was firm. "You must. A kindness like yours deserves a landmark, a true north. Please." David took the compass. It felt cool and solid in his palm. He looked from the compass to the man, and a silent understanding passed between them. The man gave a small, sad smile, stood up, and walked away, disappearing into the gray mist of the city, leaving David alone on the bench with a strange warmth spreading through his chest and a silver compass that felt like a secret promise. 20 years. A lifetime. The city had changed, and so had David. The small, quiet boy had grown into a tall, thoughtful man. The group home was a distant memory, a chapter he had closed, but whose lessons he had never forgotten. David Evans was now an architect, and a damn good one. He didn't design gleaming, sterile skyscrapers for faceless corporations. He designed spaces for people, community centers, affordable housing projects, public libraries that felt like cathedrals of knowledge. He believed that a building was more than just concrete and steel. It was the framework for a community's soul. And now, the soul of his own community, the very neighborhood he had clawed his way out of, was on the line. He stood in a boardroom that smelled of expensive leather and ambition. His blueprints spread across a vast mahogany table. Opposite him sat Richard Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a man whose smile was as polished and predatory as a shark's. Sterling was the new breed of developer, a man who saw neighborhoods not as collections of homes and histories, but as underdeveloped assets on a balance sheet. "Mr. Evans," Sterling said, his voice dripping with the condescending smoothness, "your proposal is quaint, very noble. All this talk of preserving community character and green spaces for families. It's admirable, really." He gestured dismissively at David's detailed plans for the revitalization of the district, a project that included renovating the old warehouse district into mixed-use artist lofts, a new community center, and subsidized retail space for local businesses. "But it's not realistic. My projections show a 400% ROI on a luxury high-rise condominium complex with boutique retail on the ground floor. We're talking a flagship development, a jewel in the city's crown." David kept his composure, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Sterling, your jewel will displace over 500 families. It will gut the heart of a historic neighborhood. My plan generates a modest, but sustainable, profit while investing in the people who already live there. It's not about charity. It's about smart, humane growth." Sterling chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Humane growth doesn't impress my shareholders. Quaint doesn't get you on the cover of Forbes." He looked David up and down, a subtle but unmistakable glint of disdain in his eyes. He saw a young black man in a well-worn but respectable suit, a man who had clearly pulled himself up by his bootstraps, but who, in Sterling's world, would never truly belong in this room. "Look, David," he said, the sudden use of his first name a deliberate act of dominance. "I appreciate your passion. You're from that neighborhood, aren't you? I get it. You want to save the day for your old stomping grounds. But you're swimming in the deep end now. This is about business, not sentiment." The humiliation was a quiet, creeping thing. It wasn't in a raised voice or an overt insult, but in the casual dismissal, the patronizing tone, the unspoken assumption that David's perspective, born of lived experience, was inferior to Sterling's spreadsheet calculations. "My sentiment, as you call it, is backed by sound architectural and economic principles," David said, his voice level. "And the community board is behind my proposal." Sterling waved a hand, as if shooing a fly. "The community board is a book club with a letterhead. The final decision rests with the city zoning commission, and I can assure you they understand the language of progress, the language of tax revenue." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "There's a final public hearing next Tuesday. You can make your little speech, present your charming drawings, and then the commission will vote, and we will break ground before the end of the month." He paused at the door, turning back to David. "A piece of free advice, kid. Know your place. You're a good architect. Stick to designing gazebos and playgrounds. Leave the real world to the big boys." The door clicked shut, leaving David alone. In the cavernous room, the silence pressing in on him. The insult hung in the air, sharp and bitter. "Know your place. The week leading up to the hearing was a blur of sleepless nights and frantic work. David met with community leaders, refined his presentation, and tried to rally support, but he felt like he was throwing pebbles against a fortress. Sterling's influence was everywhere. Favorable articles appeared in the business journals. City council members who had once been supportive were suddenly unavailable to take his calls. The weight of inevitability was crushing. The night before the hearing, David found himself walking through the old neighborhood. It was a place of ghosts and memories. He passed the corner store, where he used to buy candy, the public library where he discovered his love for design, the small park with the cold, familiar benches. He sat on the very bench where he had met the stranger all those years ago. The world felt just as cold and indifferent as it had then. He felt small again. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers finding the familiar, smooth, cool metal of the old compass. He pulled it out. The silver was darker now, the scratches on the glass like faint scars. But the needle still pointed north. He held it in his palm, the weight a small, solid anchor in a sea of anxiety. So you never lose your way. Had he lost his way? Was Sterling right? Was he just a naive boy playing a man's game, mistaking sentiment for strategy? He thought about the man on the bench, his hollow eyes, the way his hand trembled when he took the sandwich. That small act of giving, of seeing another person's humanity, had felt so right, so fundamental. But what had it gotten him? What did it matter in a world run by men like Sterling, men who would bulldoze 100 homes for an extra percentage point on their ROI? The compass offered no answers. It just pointed north, a silent, unwavering constant in a world of shifting allegiances and broken promises. He pocketed it, a bitter taste in his mouth, and walked home to prepare for his defeat. City Hall hearing room was designed to intimidate, paneled in dark wood, with ceilings so high, they seemed to be in another climate. It was a chamber built for power. David stood at the podium, feeling the weight of a dozen impassive faces on the zoning commission. In the front row, Richard Sterling sat with his team of lawyers, looking utterly relaxed, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Sterling went first. He was masterful. His presentation was a symphony of slick graphics, confident projections, and powerful-sounding buzzwords. Synergy, revitalization, economic stimulus, forward-thinking urban planning. He painted David's plan as a nostalgic fantasy, a roadblock to prosperity. He spoke of jobs and tax revenue, of putting the city on the global stage. He never once mentioned the families who would be evicted or the small businesses that would be shuttered. When he was done, he gave David a condescending nod, as if to say, "Follow that, kid." Then it was David's turn. He walked to the podium, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't have slick graphics or an army of lawyers. He had his blueprints, his voice, and a story. He began to speak, not about ROI or tax incentives, but about people. He spoke about Mrs. Gable, who had run the corner bakery for 40 years. He spoke about the community garden that produced fresh vegetables for 3 different housing blocks. He spoke about the kids who learned to read in the underfunded library he planned to expand. He painted a picture of a living, breathing community, a fragile ecosystem of relationships and shared history. A city is not just a collection of buildings, esteemed members of the commission, he said, his voice gaining strength and passion. It is a tapestry woven from the lives of its citizens. Mr. Sterling wants to sell you a beautiful, expensive new rug, but to lay it down, he plans to tear up the priceless tapestry that is already there. I am asking you not to tear it up, but to help me mend it, strengthen it, and make it more beautiful for generations to come. He could feel he was reaching some of them. He saw a flicker of empathy in one commissioner's eyes, a thoughtful frown on another's. But he also saw the hard, dismissive stares of the others, the ones who had likely already made their decision over a steak dinner with Sterling. As he concluded, a polite, tepid applause filled the room. The chairman of the commission cleared his throat, preparing to call the vote. David's stomach sank. It wasn't enough. Just as the chairman raised his gavel, the grand double doors at the back of the chamber swung open with a heavy, authoritative thud. Everyone turned. Two men in dark suits entered first, their presence radiating an aura of quiet, serious power. They stepped aside to allow an elderly man to walk between them. He moved slowly, with the aid of a simple wooden cane, but his posture was ramrod straight. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that was understated, but screamed of immense wealth. His hair was a shock of white, and his face was lined, but his eyes, a piercing, intelligent blue, swept the room with an unnerving intensity. An uneasy murmur rippled through the chamber. Richard Sterling's confident smirk faltered. He squinted, a flicker of confusion, then dawning horror on his face. He knew that face. Everyone in the world of high finance knew that face, though few had ever seen it in person. It was Alastair Finch, the legendary, reclusive titan of industry. A man whose net worth was measured not in billions, but as a percentage of a small country's GDP. A man who hadn't made a public appearance in over a decade. One of the men in suit stepped forward and handed a file to the stunned commission chairman. "Mr. Chairman," the lawyer said, his voice calm and resonant. "Forgive the interruption. My name is Julian Hayes, General Counsel for the Finch Foundation. We are here on behalf of Mr. Alastair Finch. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the Finch Foundation has completed its acquisition of a majority controlling interest in a holding company called Omnivest Global." A wave of shock went through the room. Omnivest was the parent company of Sterling Enterprises. Sterling had gone pale, his face a mask of disbelief. The lawyer continued, his tone clinical. "Furthermore, the Finch Foundation has also, through a subsidiary, purchased outright the entirety of the parcels of land in the downtown warehouse district currently under zoning review. As the new owners of the land and the primary stakeholder in the development company, we are officially withdrawing the Sterling Enterprises proposal." The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet you could hear the frantic pounding of Richard Sterling's heart. He shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. On what grounds? My project is fully funded. It's been approved." Alastair Finch took a slow step forward, tapping his cane once on the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Your project, Mr. Sterling," Finch said, his voice quiet, but carrying the immense weight of his authority, "is predicated on a foundation of greed and a callous disregard for human dignity. It is, therefore, a poor investment." Finch's piercing blue eyes scanned the room until they landed on David, who was standing at the podium, utterly bewildered. Finch's hard expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. David Evans," he said, his voice now carrying a different tone, one of warmth and respect. "I believe we met some time ago, in a park." It was a very cold day. The blood drained from David's face. His mind reeled, trying to connect the powerful man before him with the broken, shivering figure on the park bench. The coat, the eyes, the voice, now stripped of its rasping despair, held a core of the same timber. It was him. David's hand instinctively went to his pocket, to the compass. Finch saw the movement and a small, genuine smile touched his lips for the first time. "I never got your last name," Finch said. "You told me it was just David. For 20 years, that's all I had. But I never forgot. I tasked my foundation with the quiet mission to find a boy named David from this neighborhood, a boy with an uncommon sense of compassion. The search was fruitless for years, but my foundation also reviews thousands of grant proposals for community-minded projects. And a few months ago, a brilliant architectural plan for the revitalization of this very district crossed my desk. A plan focused on people, not profits. It was signed by a man named David Evans." He looked directly at David. "I had a feeling." "May I see it?" David was in a daze. He walked forward, his legs unsteady, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out the old, tarnished silver compass and held it out. Alastair Finch took it, his fingers closing around the familiar object. He turned it over in his hand, a universe of memory in the small gesture. "True north," Finch said softly to himself. Then he looked up, his eyes locking with David's. "You fed a man who had lost all hope. You gave him your only meal, and asked for nothing in return. You reminded him that humanity was still worth investing in. That investment, Mr. Evans, is about to pay a dividend. He turned his gaze back to Richard Sterling, and the warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial coldness. Mr. Sterling, your business model involves bullying communities and preying on the vulnerable. You mistook this man's integrity for naivete. You saw his background as a weakness, when in fact it is the source of his greatest strength. You told him to know his place. Finch took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet every person in the room heard it clearly. Let me tell you, your place, as of this moment, your employment with Sterling Enterprises is terminated. An internal audit of your predatory acquisition practices has already begun. I suspect you will be spending more time with your lawyers than on a golf course from now on. Sterling sputtered, his face a mottled red and white. You can't. I built that company. You built a house of cards on a foundation of greed, Richard, Finch said, using his first name with a final, devastating familiarity. And a gentle wind just blew it down. Security will see you out. The two men in suits moved forward, and a stunned, broken Richard Sterling was escorted from the room, his empire crumbling to dust around him in a matter of minutes. Alistair Finch then addressed the stunned commission. The Finch Foundation will be moving forward with Mr. Evans's original proposal. He will be given full creative control and an unlimited budget to see it through. We believe in his vision. We believe in this community. He turned back to David, his eyes holding a deep, paternal warmth. The first investment you make, he said, should always be in people. It yields the best returns. Weeks later, David stood with Alistair Finch on a dusty patch of ground, the site where the new community center would soon rise. The demolition of the old, derelict warehouses was already underway, but it was a careful, deliberate process, not the brutal razing Sterling had planned. My son died, Finch said quietly, looking at the skyline, a week before I met you in that park. He was 25. He had all the money in the world, and none of the happiness. I was lost. I had built an empire of things, and I had forgotten the value of people. I went to that park to feel nothing, to disappear, and then this little boy offered me his sandwich. He turned to David, his eyes misty. That sandwich, David, it saved my life. It reminded me that wealth isn't what's in your bank account, but what you're willing to give away. You didn't just give me food. You gave me a reason to find my way back. David looked down at the compass in his hand, then at the blueprints under his arm. He finally understood. The compass hadn't been a magical charm that led to riches. It had been a reminder of his own true north, empathy, community, and the unwavering belief that a single act of kindness could be the most powerful architecture of all. The story of David Evans and the stranger in the park serves as a powerful testament to a truth our world often forgets, that the currency of kindness is the only one that truly appreciates over time. It demonstrates that a person's true worth is not measured by their title or the balance in their account, but by the integrity of their character and the compassion in their heart. In a world that so often rewards the loud arrogance of privilege, it is the quiet strength of the underestimated that holds the power to reshape our future, proving that the most profound and lasting structures are not built with steel and glass, but with empathy and justice. If you are moved by this story of how a simple act of kindness can echo through decades and bring forth poetic justice, please subscribe to our channel. We are dedicated to sharing more powerful narratives that champion the unseen, challenge the status quo, and reveal the truth that always lies beneath the surface.